At 3:07 a.m., when the world was silent and even the streetlights seemed half asleep, a trembling voice whispered into an emergency phone line, and with those few fractured words, a nightmare that had been hiding in plain sight for years finally began to bleed into the open, because that call was not asking for help in the way dispatchers were used to. It was confessing without realizing it, and by the time the line went dead, an entire life had already been rewritten in blood. The story begins in the quiet suburban town of Briar Hollow, a place known for trimmed hedges, porch lights left on overnight, and neighbors who waved politely but rarely asked questions. And at the center of this town lived Emily Carter, a 32-year-old nurse, described by friends as gentle, dependable, and quietly joyful. Someone who worked night shifts at the local hospital and came home just before dawn, passing joggers and bakery delivery trucks as her day ended and theirs began. And waiting at home for her was Daniel Carter, her husband of 6 years, an IT technician who worked remotely, barely known beyond a friendly smile and his habit of fixing neighbors' Wi-Fi problems for free. To outsiders, their marriage looked calm, even boring. But calm has a way of hiding cracks, and boring often means no one is paying attention. The early years of their relationship were described as fast and intense. Emily having moved in with Daniel only 3 months after they met, drawn to what she called his steadiness, his quiet nature and the feeling of being protected, while Daniel told friends he admired Emily's compassion and discipline. But subtle warning signs surfaced almost immediately, arguments that ended abruptly when Daniel shut down, moments when Emily stopped answering texts for hours, and the slow disappearance of his social life, explained away by exhaustion from work. On the night of October 14th, everything seemed routine. Emily clocked out at 1:45 a.m., texted a coworker that she was heading home, and was last seen on hospital security cameras walking toward her car, the parking lot lights casting long shadows that followed her like fingers, and she arrived home at approximately 2:20 a.m., according to a traffic camera near her street. But what happened inside that house between 2:20 and 3:07 was unknown until that single phone call shattered the illusion of normalcy. The call came from Emily's phone, registered to her name, but the voice was not entirely hers. It was strained, shallow, and slurred, as if speaking through pain or fear. And she told the "He didn't mean to, I think, but I can't breathe, and there's so much blood," followed by a pause long enough for the dispatcher to beg her to stay on the line. And then Emily whispered, "Please tell my sister I tried," before a male voice entered the background, calm but urgent, saying, "Emily, hang up now." And the call abruptly disconnected. Police were dispatched immediately, but response time stretched differently in the middle of the night, and it took 9 minutes for the first patrol car to arrive. Lights off until the final turn to avoid alerting a possible suspect. And when officers approached the Carter residence, they noticed the front door slightly open, the porch light flickering, and a metallic smell hanging in the cool air that no amount of suburban charm could disguise. Inside, they found Emily on the kitchen floor, barely conscious. Blood pooled beneath her, her breathing shallow and irregular, and standing over her was Daniel, hands raised, eyes wide, repeating the same sentence over and over. "It was an accident. It was an accident," while the knife lay on the counter behind him, wiped clean but not clean enough. Paramedics rushed Emily to the hospital, but she was pronounced dead 40 minutes later due to internal bleeding caused by a deep abdominal wound. And with that pronouncement, Briar Hollow lost its innocence. Daniel was taken into custody without resistance, but from the beginning, nothing about the case fit neatly together, because Daniel had no criminal record, no history of violence, and neighbors described him as soft-spoken and helpful, while initial forensic analysis suggested the wound was not consistent with a sudden accident, but with a forceful, deliberate stab. During interrogation, Daniel told a story that shifted with each retelling, first claiming Emily slipped while holding the knife, then saying they were arguing and she lunged toward him, then suggesting she injured herself intentionally during a breakdown. And each version collapsed under scrutiny, especially when investigators recovered fragments of the 3 a.m. phone call audio, enhanced to reveal breathing patterns and background noises, including the unmistakable sound of a chair scraping the floor and a door being locked. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a hidden layer beneath Daniel's calm exterior. Years of controlling behavior documented through Emily's private journals, which she had hidden in an old shoebox in the garage. Journals describing isolation, fear, and an escalation of emotional abuse that had turned physical in the months leading up to her death. And perhaps most chilling were her final entries, written just days before, in which she expressed plans to leave Daniel and stay with her sister, plans she never had the chance to act on. Friends came forward with stories they had dismissed as minor at the time. Bruises explained away as clumsiness, sudden cancellations of trips, tearful phone calls that ended quickly when Daniel entered the room, and the town began to realize that the monster had never been hidden, only ignored. The investigation revealed that the 3 a.m. call was not a spontaneous act, but a final moment of defiance. Emily had known she was dying, and in those fading seconds, she chose to expose the truth, using the only weapon she had left, her voice. And prosecutors centered their case around that call, arguing it demonstrated consciousness, fear, and the presence of a third party who exerted control even in her last moments. Daniel's defense attempted to dismantle this narrative, bringing in experts to argue stress-induced hallucinations, audio contamination, and the possibility of marital conflict escalating beyond intention. But the jury heard the call, raw and unfiltered, and watched Emily's words hang in the air like a ghost refusing to leave. After a 6-week trial, Daniel Carter was found guilty of second-degree murder, sentenced to 40 years in prison. And as the verdict was read, members of Briar Hollow sat frozen, forced to reconcile their image of a helpful neighbor with the reality of a man capable of unimaginable violence behind closed doors. Even with the conviction, questions lingered about how many chances there were to stop this, how many signs went unrecognized, and how many other monsters were still blending into quiet streets just like theirs. And the 3 a.m. call remains archived as evidence, used in training sessions to teach dispatchers how a single sentence can carry the weight of an entire life. A reminder that sometimes the truth does not scream. It whispers in the dark, waiting for someone to listen. This has been Midnight Crime Vault, where the quietest moments often hide the loudest truths. And now we ask you, do you think this tragedy could have been prevented if someone had looked closer? And how many warning signs do we all ignore every day? And if stories like this haunt you and you want to explore more cases that hide in the shadows, subscribe to Midnight Crime Vault and step back into the darkness with us.